On behalf of the NKUL Program Committee, I'm very happy to introduce Professor David Levy from the University of Washington. Levy is famous for his research on information overload. In his research, he argues that there could be a problem with the mountain of information and distractions that are available to us in a constantly connected digital world. He believes that the key is to find the proper balance between new technologies and human experiences. We have invited Professor Levy to give us a deeper insight or understanding of how to deal with information and social media in order to help students take control over their own digital lives. And I assume, to some extent, that also involves us. David Levy holds a PhD from Stanford University in computer science from 1979. He holds a diploma in calligraphy and bookbinding from the Roehampton Institute in London in 1982. For 15 years, until December 1999, he was a member of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, where his research focused on the nature of documents and on the tools and practices through which they are created and used. His current research focuses on information and the quality of life. He is the author of Scrolling Forward, Making Sense of Documents in the Digital Age from 2001, and there's a new edition this year. And his book, Mindful Tech, was just published in January, and I believe it's on sale upstairs if somebody is interested. He has taught at the Information School in Seattle since 2001, and he is a renowned lecturer. In his work, he is particularly interested in how, as individuals and as a society, we might live healthy, reflective, and productive lives, while participating in an accelerating, information-saturated culture. The question we are posing ourselves is, how can we, as educators, help our students to focus on the right things at the right time, to get the job done without being too distracted? That's the question, right? Schools have tried to cope with multitasking by introducing restrictions like banning Facebook, introducing mobile hotels, and so on. But are we on the right track? We are looking for some answers. David, and the title of your lecture is Mindful Tech, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Is that about the right level? Can you all hear me in the back? Excellent. I like to see the people in the back, as well as the people in the front. We're all teachers, right? We all know what it's like to want to share what we understand and know with others and to learn from the people with us. And that's how I feel about this wonderful gathering that I've been invited to. What an extraordinary thing, 1,300 of you here, all around this very important subject of how we bring technology in fruitful and productive ways into the classroom and how we teach our students about that. One of the most crucial things we need to be looking at as a society. So what I'm going to do is in the next hour is I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into the way that I've been thinking about the challenge, the exciting challenge of bringing technologies in fruitful and productive ways into our lives, both professionally and personally. To start with a little bit more about me, I say here that I've lived a life in the fast world and the slow world. And so already you're going to hear a talk about how I try to balance different dimensions of contemporary life. On the left side of the slide, you see the credentials that show that I'm basically been a techie. Actually, I realized as I was walking over here from the hotel that I first learned to program 50 years ago, at a time when it wasn't so easy to get access to a mainframe. So I've had a lot of experience. I've had a lot to do with the development, digital developments. PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence from Stanford. A researcher actually closer to 20 years at Xerox PARC, which is the place that some of you probably know was where most of the tools of the personal computer revolution were either invented or integrated, the place that Steve Jobs went into and saw the technologies and walked out with his ideas for Apple. So I spent a lot of years at Xerox PARC, and for the past 15 years I've been a professor in the information school, teaching future information professionals. So I have a very strong track record in the world of tech. I also was I was part of an early Silicon Valley startup, and I did consulting work at various times. So I know the tech world very well and have really loved the technology side of it. But then you go to this other side of my life, and I say that I've been involved in the slow world of craft and contemplation, which doesn't seem to fit so naturally with the left side. But it was even while I was still a graduate student at Stanford studying computer science and AI, that I began to feel that I needed something more in my life that I couldn't quite figure out. I felt I needed greater quiet. I needed what I would now say was a certain quality of slow time. And I began to study calligraphy in the San Francisco area. And then when I was finished with my PhD, I did something that seemed crazy at the time, which was to leave all of that behind and to spend 2 years in London learning how to write with a quill pen and to do gilding and learning the history of writing. It was only much later, actually, it was only a few years later that it began to become clear, by the way, that the computer was turning into the writing tool of the future. And so my very experiments and explorations of, if you like, low tech were directly relevant to the things that were happening in the digital world. Calligraphy, I'd like to say, was my first contemplative practice, although I wouldn't have called it that. It was a practice that allowed me to quiet down inside, that allowed me and encouraged me to bring my body and movement into my life in ways that sitting in front of the computer and programming had never really done. Today, of course, we have the mindfulness movement, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But 30 years ago, I didn't have words like contemplative or mindful. I just knew that in addition to the fast world life of tech in Silicon Valley, I needed something else. I began a meditation practice, what we would now call a mindfulness meditation practice 30 years ago, and that has been very important to me in continuing to cultivate a sense of balance, of the intellect and the body and the mind, all of it coming together in ways that I think are actually very important for the 21st century. I've also trained in Aikido, which is one of the more contemplative martial arts. By the way, the phrase, when I say I've lived in the fast world and the slow world, I'm actually borrowing that from a very well-known New York Times journalist who years ago wrote a book called The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and he said, "Today there is no more first world, second world, or third world. There's just the fast world, the world of the wide open plain, and the slow world, the world of those who either fall by the wayside or choose to live away from the plain in some artificially walled-off valley of their own because they find the fast world to be too fast, too scary, too homogenizing, or too demanding." Now, I don't actually agree with that quote, and I think it's a valuable quote because I'm a person who doesn't end up at the extremes. I think that the fast world has its place and is important. But I think the slow world matters too. And I think the challenge we face, and I have faced as a person, is how to blend the best of the fast world with the best of the slow world. What balance could actually look like? As it happens, a Norwegian anthropologist, some of you may have heard of, named Thomas Eriksson, wrote a book in 2001 called Tyranny of the Moment, where he talked about fast and slow time. And he said, when fast and slow time meet, fast time wins. This is why one never gets the important things done, because there's always something else one has to do first. Naturally, we'll always tend to do the most urgent things first. In this way, the slow and long-term activities lose out. In an age when the distinctions between work and leisure are being erased, and efficiency seems to be the only value in economics, politics, and research, this is really bad news for things like thorough, far-sighted work, play, and long-term love relationships. And I would add, it's also really bad news for thinking. A culture in which everything is set to be fast time doesn't give us the time for intimate conversation and relationships and for thinking deeply about things. And we know what that's like when we're living our lives where we have 5 minutes for this and 10 minutes for that. It's one of the most challenging things that I've experienced as an academic over the past 15 years, is creating the space and time for slow time activities like thinking and reading and writing. But ultimately, what I want to talk to you about is how do we balance those? Not how do we eliminate either one of them, but how do we bring them both into our teaching and introduce them to our students as well. Another thing that I've been thinking about and worrying about and concerned about, and I imagine many of you too have been, is about the whole question of distraction and attention. Yep, there we go. Attention and distraction. We all know that as powerful as our digital tools are, that they also are tools powerfully distracting as well. Right? And so we're at a time when we're having a cultural conversation about what is the place of attention in a world where there is distraction, and how do we even begin to think about it? Well, this is not a new problem. It's not something that arose with our digital devices. In fact, 100 years ago, William James, the founder of American psychology, wrote in 1890, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui, the Latin word for master of himself or oneself, if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty, would be the education par excellence." So 100 years ago, he was saying, in order to be most fully human, we need the capacity to bring our attention back and to have a stronger attention. As it happens, there is an education that can improve the faculty of attention. We're lucky enough to be living through a time not only of tremendous technology explosion and innovation, but we're living through a time, especially in places like the United States, where there is a kind of mindfulness movement, where people are beginning to bring mindfulness techniques that strengthen attention and improve emotion regulation into all the grades, beginning in kindergarten through 12th grade, and even into higher education, which is the work that I'm doing now. So 100 years ago, William James could say, if only we knew how to help people become more attentive, that would be an incredible education. And the answer is we're learning how to do it now through this kind of work. And what's more, there's a growing body of neuroscience and cognitive science showing that it really works. The piece of the work that I've been doing and that I'm here to talk to you about is to add one more bubble into this. My work is about the intersection of mindfulness, education, and technology. Because I believe that in order to use the tools to their best advantage and to ours, which is presumably what we all want to do in this room, we have more to learn about how to use them in healthy and productive ways for ourselves, and also how to teach our students about that. So what I'm talking about is balance. I'll keep using that word throughout this talk. How do we find balance with and without our digital tools in a world that is accelerating and in many ways overloading us and at times overwhelming us? Well, here's an advertisement that speaks to this very issue that I discovered in the New York Times years ago. It's an ad for the IBM ThinkPad. IBM has now turned over these devices to Lenovo, but it's still the same basic machines. And what does it show? It shows a man sitting with his laptop, presumably working. I see a lot of you with your laptops here. Same thing, except where is this man sitting? He's sitting in the library. And if you look at the text of the ad, it says, in deep halcyon repose, and it gives the dictionary definition for halcyon as peaceful. So this is an ad that to me is speaking about bringing the technological and the contemplative together. It's not necessarily suggesting that you ought to spend all your time in the library, or that you should go into the library. But as I read the symbolism of this ad, it's suggesting that, at least in American culture, and maybe true in yours as well, the library remains a potent symbol of attention, of quiet, of concentration. The books there are partly symbols of that as well. So it's kind of suggesting exactly what I want to be suggesting to you, that we can bring the old and the new together. We can bring the fast and the slow together. We can bring old technologies and new technologies together. But that part of what I believe needs to motivate us in that is figuring out how we bring our full selves to the forms of study that we're trying to bring, how we can be attentive and engaged and not distracted, as we are, many of us, and I think especially our students, so often when we have the technologies in front of us. As it happens, I've been writing about this issue for 21 years now. And there's a relationship to Norway, because the very first article that I ever wrote on this subject was for a conference, in a workshop that was here in Norway. It was a workshop of computer scientists and social scientists meeting on a little island, whose name I can't really pronounce correctly, Oksnoen, which is a little island in a lake about, 50 miles south of Oslo. Has anyone ever been to the island? A few people, right. So I've been there twice. And it was an international workshop where we'd go for a week, we'd write position papers, and we would talk about it and drink good wine and eat good salmon and the things that are so wonderful about being in Norway. And the very first article that I ever wrote was this one. It was called, "I'm Not Here Right Now to Take Your Call, Technology and the Politics of Absence," in which I was, for the first time, was beginning to reflect on the possibility that our digital tools, which at the time included cell phones and the beginnings of email and call waiting, just the very beginning of all of that, I began to wonder whether the tools that were being promoted as tools to connect us could also be disconnecting us. And if that was right, how could we begin to understand this interplay between connection and disconnection? 21 years ago. And so over this time, I've been asking questions like, well, how do we relate to, what's the relationship between fast and slow living? How do we deal with attention in a world of distraction? And when is it appropriate to be connected and when is it appropriate to be disconnected? And how do we even begin to think about that? That's what I've been thinking about for the past 20 years. And in my work at the University of Washington, where I've been for the last 15 years, I moved directly from Silicon Valley, from Xerox PARC 15 years ago, to Seattle, which is another tech mecca, right? Another place where technology is booming. And what I started doing in my search for balance was, first, I started organizing conferences with titles like Information, Silence, and Sanctuary, or Mindful Work in Technology, where I started bringing technologists and academics and artists together to ask exactly these kinds of questions. How do we find balance? How do we make sense out of this? I've done my own research. Some of my research, if you want to Google it at some point, if you look up David Levy, No Time to Think, you'll see that part of what I've been doing is exploring the political, social, and economic conditions that have led to our speed up. I have a talk at Google that's been viewed a lot. I have a couple of academic papers, and I'm finishing a book with a working title, No Time to Think. I've also done some empirical research, including research on mindfulness, meditation, and multitasking, showing that actually by training the attention, you can become better at multitasking. And of course, that's a whole conversation. What does it mean to be better at multitasking? I've also been in dialogue with students, undergraduates across the United States for the past 10 years, asking them directly how they feel about the technologies and learning a lot about it. These are all things that I don't have time to talk about today, but if you go to my website, you'll find more of this stuff. What I am going to talk about in the remaining time is a course that I created 10 years ago at the University of Washington called Information and Contemplation, and the learning that's been coming out of that, which then led to the book that I've just published called Mindful Tech. This is a course in which undergraduates, masters, and PhD students are all invited to come in together. I love as a teacher, being able to bring students together at different ages. So I've taught students in this course who are 18 and 19 years old, in their 20s, in their 30s, and 40s and 50s, all together in the same room. And the basic idea of this course, and here's a very nice article about this course that appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education 3 or 4 years ago. The Chronicle of Higher Education is the main newspaper, national newspaper in the United States. They actually sent a journalist to Seattle from Washington who spent 2 whole days with me, came to my course, and wrote what for Journalism Today was quite a long piece about my course. So what the course does, it's basically a very simple idea. It invites students to explore their relationship with their digital devices and apps by paying attention to their experience, to what's happening in their mind and body when they're actually using their devices. In other words, when you're on your phone texting, what's actually going on in your mind? What's going on in your body? What's your emotional state? How are you breathing? What's your posture like? Or when you're multitasking, or when you're on Facebook or Instagram, what are you actually feeling and experiencing? And what I'm about to show you is that some seemingly stupid or simplistic idea, just turn around and look at yourself and how you're feeling, turns out to open up a realm of choice and possibilities that allows students to come to their own understanding of what a healthier and more effective relationship with their devices is. I'm not the teacher, I'm not the authority figure telling anybody, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. I'm the coach inviting people into a space, a trusting space, where over the course of 10 weeks, they get to go through a series of exercises that I'm about to explain to you, and they get to make their own discoveries, and they get to come up with their own guidelines, which I think are ultimately much more effective than somebody telling somebody else what to do or saying, here are the 3 rules of email. You want the 3 rules of email? You can Google it, and you'll find the 3 rules, the 5 rules, the 7 rules. Why are there so many rules? Because they don't all work for everybody the same way. We all have different cognitive and emotional makeup and experience. So out of respect for my students, I encourage them to become the experts. Now, I do bring mindfulness and contemplative practices into the classroom. That's one of the out-of-the-box things I do. In the very first class, I introduce them to mindful breathing. I'll bet a number of you have had some experience with that, whatever you think of it. You know, maybe you've done it in yoga class where you pay attention to your breathing. You focus your attention on your breathing, and then when your mind begins to wander, you bring it back to your breath. It's a very sobering experience to try to control your attention. To do something, if I dared you to just pay attention to your breath for 3 minutes now and not have your mind wander, like me, you wouldn't be able to do it. Powerful as attention is, as the attention muscle is, it needs to be trained in order to be more available to us, because basically our minds are jumping around all the time, distracted, and that has nothing to do with our devices. That's just in the nature of the way the untrained mind works. So from the very first class, I introduce students to mindful breathing. I also introduce a practice that I call the mindful check-in, where I ask them to turn their attention around and to ask, what's going on with my breathing right now? Is it fast or slow? How does my body feel? Are there places where I'm in pain, like my neck or my shoulders? What's my posture like? Am I leaning on my elbow? What's my emotional state? Am I bored? Am I frustrated? Am I anxious? Am I happy? I mean, these are all questions that you can answer for yourself right now, because one of the remarkable things about human attention is we can not only direct it outward to the world, but we can actually turn it around and inquire how we're feeling in the moment. So I introduce these practices and other practices throughout the quarter. But the most original piece of this work is a series of 5 exercises that I ask students to do. All of these exercises, by the way, are in my book. I'm going to briefly give you a sense of what these exercises look like, and then I'm going to show you quotes from students so you can begin to get a sense of the things that people are learning from this. The very first exercise is email observation. I ask students over the course of a week to spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes a day while they're using email and just to notice their experience. What happens in your body or to your emotions when you first see your inbox? What happens when a certain message arises? What do? Do you hold your breath? What is that telling you? What is your emotional state? I ask them to do that over the course of a week. They keep a log, they keep notes about what they're discovering. At the end of it, they write a 2 or 3 page reflection on what they've discovered, including a list of personal guidelines, things that they would change based on their use of email. And then I ask everyone to read everybody else's reflection, and we get together in class, and people begin to see all the different responses and ways that people relate to email and the kinds of changes they would make. So there's both the turning inward to examine your own experience, but then there's the very important group discussion and sharing as people learn from one another and discover diversity and difference in the ways that we use these tools. The second exercise, so that's just observation. The second exercise is a focused form of email that I want people to try, which is the equivalent of mindful breathing. In mindful breathing, the instructions say, pay attention to your breath. When your mind wanders to something else, bring it back to the breath, bring it back to the breath. In focused email, I say, I want you to try focusing only on email. And when your mind begins to wander, like, oh, maybe I should check Facebook now, or maybe I should go to Instagram, or my phone is ringing. You notice that, and you bring yourself back to the email. So you're basically, notice what we're doing here is we're using the technology itself as a tool to develop greater mindfulness. Yes, you can develop mindfulness by sitting in the corner and just following your breath, but you can also develop it when you're using the technologies themselves. The next 2 exercises are really tremendous fun because they're all about multitasking. I don't have an opinion. As the coach, I don't tell people that multitasking is either good or bad. I think multitasking, if you think of it as the serial switching of attention from one object of attention to another, is something we're all doing all day long, whether it's with technology or not. It's just part of the way we are as human beings. But surely there are times when multitasking is bad, like texting and driving. Sometimes it's really bad, and sometimes it ought to be an informed choice. Is this a good time for me to be multitasking or not? That's what I want students to explore, not black and white distinctions. So basically what I do with the multitasking exercise is I have them record themselves multitasking. We happen to use something called Camtasia by TechSmith, but there are many other tools out there that will actually record what's going on the screen. And by the way, I think this is maybe a very useful exercise for younger students as well, because it can actually have a game-like feeling. If you record yourself while you're switching between your phone and multiple windows and all of that, and then what I do is I tell the students, I want you to notice the choice points. I want you to notice when you switched from one thing to another, and I want you to see if you can figure out why you switched. And I want you to notice the times when you could have switched, your phone rang, but you didn't pick it up, and decide when you didn't switch. So I want people to begin to reflect on and become conscious of their current multitasking habits. Again, not about good or bad, but just see how you currently multitask. And then what happens, this is the amazing thing, that when you bring mindfulness and awareness to it, students will essentially automatically begin to notice things that they could do differently and better. So in fact, again, they write guidelines, and then we share those with everyone. The next exercise, which may seem like a contradiction, is I show them that there's a way to do a much more focused form of multitasking. That multitasking doesn't have to be this sort of in a fog, clicking around. That you can actually, the stronger your attention is, the better that you can actually multitask. Because what happens, multitasking is all about choice. Do I stay with what I'm doing, or do I switch to something else? Well, if you can notice the triggers that are arising that may cause you to want to switch. For example, anxiety or boredom are things that people often mention. I don't like what I'm doing right now. I'm working on my assignment, but I don't know I got stuck. I don't know what to say. Let me go to Instagram, right? If you can notice those triggers, then you can make a conscious choice. Is this a good moment for me to switch or not? Again, there's my philosophy. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. You, within the context of what you're doing in the moment, can make a decision. And then the last of the exercises is unplugging. I ask students for a minimum of 24 hours to let go of at least one device or app. Same thing again. Notice over that period of time what's going on in your mind and body. Keep a log of it. Write a reflection, and then share it with everyone. So these are the exercises. These are not the ultimate exercises, but they're examples that I've developed over the last 10 years of how to get students to be actively reflective about their use of the technologies. And now, having given you an introduction to it, I want to give you a sense of some of the things that people learn. These are all examples. You shouldn't read any of these as me saying this is what everyone should do. These are just examples of what particular students have decided. So perhaps the first and most important lesson that people develop is, wow, I can really observe myself, and I really learned something from it. So listen to this one student. She says, my favorite part of this exercise was the level of attention I was giving to my habits. Before paying attention this week, I never really knew what I was doing. I have often described the experience of bouncing mindlessly along the internet as an internet blackout. Thankfully, instead of waking up on a dirty sidewalk with no shoes or money in Las Vegas, I just wake up somewhere out there on the internet. I'll find myself looking at animated GIFs of Beyoncé at the Super Bowl and have no idea how I got there. We can all relate to that, right? Absolutely. I am sure that paying attention to my habits is the first step to helping me focus when I need to and to resist the deliciously tempting distractions of the internet. I could stop right now and you will have essentially gotten the central message that I'm trying to deliver from this. But there are more fun and interesting things for you to see. So let me give you some more examples. Some of the biggest discoveries are that strong emotions, like anxiety and boredom, drive them in ways they never realized before. A student says, the reason I feel the need to check my email all the time on my phone is the hope that I will have a new message from one or two people that I would love to hear from. But the fact is that 90+% of the time, my emails are not of that personal nature. I am always hoping it will be the email I have been waiting for. Don't we all recognize that, right? I mean, that's beautiful. I love the honesty. I've succeeded in creating a trusting environment in which it's safe for people to say, this is really what I'm discovering, or this one. Why the incessant need to check? Because I did not want to be in that moment of waiting for the bus to arrive, waiting for the bus to deliver me, waiting for Guffman, waiting for the coffee to be made, waiting for class to start, waiting. I did not want to be waiting for anything. I wanted to be active with my schoolwork, complete work tasks, remove myself from the headspin of stressing over my to-do list, not waiting. It's clear to me that I have been using this outlet as a way to dissociate from the moment because I am overwhelmed. So noticing that opens up a space of choice. This is what I'm feeling because I have to wait. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go to your phone, but it might mean that you could choose something else. Your choice. Another thing that people discover is how inattentive they can be. Here's a student, I won't read the whole quote, who talks about discovering that when she's on email, I notice many voices and images in my head. I think about assignments due, meals I need to cook, people I need to call, and so on. We can all relate to that half-hearted attention when we're online so much of the time. But you shouldn't think that the things that people are discovering are only the negative things or the problems. They're also discovering the ways in which the tools are working well for them. So here's a woman, for example, who discovers that she'd never realized it, that she's more focused while she's doing email than at almost any other time of the day. She says, in large regard, the quality of my attention to my email is very high. When I'm actively reading or responding to messages, I am perhaps the most intensely focused of any activity throughout my whole day. This is a positive thing to discover, and then to ask, great, what can I learn from this that I can take into other parts of my life? And by the way, while many of my students discover that they want to use email less or want to be on Facebook less, There are people who go the other direction as well. There are students who discover that they're actually serving really more important functions for them than they even realize, and that they want to do those activities more. So again, it's up to the individual to make their own discoveries. Another thing that people discover is that, wow, focused attention can be a really positive thing. I'll skip this one in the interest of time. Here's a student saying, telling myself to focus on email actually helped make the process less stressful. Isn't that interesting? Focusing on email became less stressful. I had permission to let go of things because it was time for email and email only. Focusing on one thing is less stressful than panicking about 50. Again, I'm not saying this would be true for everyone, but it was definitely true for this student. People discover that coming back into their body and feeling their breath can make a real difference. In the afternoons, I tend to feel fragmented, tired, and I do have a harder time concentrating, but I've started to do 30 to 60-second breath meditations prior to opening my inbox in the afternoons, and it is a huge help. Overall, then, the big takeaway is we can learn to be more attentive, and we can learn to make wiser, attentional choices. And I think it's a part of our job as educators to figure out how to help our students do this, even as we ourselves are trying to figure it out for ourselves. Let me come back to the William James quote. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again, that's that mindfulness technique, come back to the breath again and again, come back to email again and again, is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is master of himself if he doesn't have it. We can learn to be masters of ourselves, to have greater agency, with or without the technologies. A couple more quotes. Being able to direct your attention and choose what to pay attention to is, I believe, an essential coping mechanism. So this is a student writing, to deal with all these new voices, all these new things that are demanding our attention. When we are mindful, we choose to pay attention to what is explicitly important to us. Being mindful begins to reveal our values in a way wandering lost through the digital landscape can never do. Or this one. The problem, at least for me, isn't all the new stuff that's changed and been introduced in the digital age. The problem has always been one of awareness and balance. It's easy to get swept up, but mindfulness shows us that we still have agency, that we still have control. We can adjust our attention and make choices if we are aware of what we're doing and our emotional response. How am I doing on time? So I have a few more slides. I've been telling you that basically students develop their own guidelines. And of course, I have hundreds, if not thousands, of these guidelines. I'm just going to show you a few of them so you can see the kinds of things that people decide to do. Here, a student says to herself, avoid the impulse to check email numerous times a day. When I feel the urge to check email out of the blue, engage in a healthy activity like reading, taking a walk, biking, etc. Or this one. When I notice the internal tug to engage with email or Facebook and there is not a real need, I will be mindful of it and ask myself, why? There's the pause, there's the question. Why am I feeling this? I might still engage with these technologies, even if a real need does not exist, but it will be with a more mindful interaction. There's where control lies, in awareness and making conscious choices. And I love this one. This is an undergraduate. Do not check email on phone while walking. That's something we could all learn from, even me. Okay, so I'm basically done. I'm almost done with my remarks. The pedagogical principles that I have been following in the development of this course is, first of all, I'm bringing mindfulness of contemplative awareness into the classroom. I'm suggesting to people that being able to be present in the moment is a very important and valuable skill. I give priority to students' own discoveries and not to general rules or principles. And as I've said already, I don't set myself up as the expert who's going to tell them what the right answer is, because I don't know what the right answer is for them. Group sharing and reflection is very important on these individual discoveries, so that the individual and the group, we're all working together. And I'm learning as much from them as they're learning from one another, and I hope occasionally they're learning something from me. A very important point that I haven't discussed is people are discovering that their own relationship to the technologies is much more complex than they realized before, and possibly even contradictory. You can love Facebook and hate Facebook. You can love Instagram and hate Instagram. You can feel good about what you're doing at times, and other times you can want to throw your device down the toilet. I mean, people begin to see that the simplistic views that say the technologies are God's gift to the world or the technologies are the destruction of the world, that those two simplistic views don't actually correspond to the ways we experience them when we actually pay attention. And then, of course, all of this really only works because I've been able to create a safe and trusting environment in which people are willing to say these beautiful, honest things about what they're discovering. So the conclusion is, yes, our digital tools are powerful and they can be empowering, and we wouldn't be sitting here in this room. We wouldn't be having this conference if we didn't believe that the tools were powerful and useful and meaningful in education and in other sectors. But the truth is, they can be very distracting. They are very distracting. There are questions about how to use them well in the classroom. And in certain cases, like texting and driving, they can be very dangerous. So we need a balanced view of this. And the best news of all, for me at least, is we can educate ourselves to use them in healthier and more effective ways. I've just given you one example of from my course of 10 years, which is only meant as an example, an illustration of what it could be like to bring students into active reflection, observation, and conversation about the place of the technologies in their lives. In the United States, at least, I'm amazed that there is almost none of this work being done. And I don't know what the case is here in Norway. We have such a rich and wonderful opportunity to do this work. And that's part of what I'm preaching, is let's do more of this work. And let's actually help all of us to use these remarkable tools better. Okay. One last slide, actually two. So here's where I started. Here was my symbol of balance, the library as a symbol of the contemplative, of the quiet, combined with the devices, the tools, bringing them together into a more harmonious whole. The very first time that I showed this slide was some years back at the Information School in Seattle. I was very excited when I saw it in the New York Times Magazine. I thought, wow, I can really use that, and I've been using it for years. And there was somebody sitting in the audience, a librarian, as it happens, from the University of Washington, who at the end of my talk said, David, I think that ad was shot here at the University of Washington. I said, how could that possibly be? It had to be maybe a New York advertising agency or an LA advertising agency. Why in the world would they shoot an ad like this at the University of Washington? Well, she said, well, I was just at another talk and this ad was in the Wall Street Journal, and somebody said, this is taken in the East Asia Library. So Joyce Ogburn, the librarian, and I went to the East Asia Library. And what we found was the chair was still in the same place where it had been used for this advertisement. And I promise you, this is not a Photoshop job. This is actually me sitting in the same chair, which is amazing, right? I thought, wow, this is cosmic, this is spooky, this is weird, this is funny. But in the end, what I've really concluded is it's just a reminder that all the things that I'm talking about today and that you're talking about, the vital concerns that we all have for the future and for education and for how the technologies fit and should fit into our lives, that all of this is really close to home. It's right here, and we have the opportunity to work on it together. Thank you very much. So we actually have some time. I'm hoping that a few people will offer some comments or questions. I'd love to be in conversation with you. And we have, I believe, a couple of microphones. And I apologize. I know there are people in 2 other rooms. I don't think you have a way to speak. But I offer you the opportunity. Raise your hand and somebody will give you a microphone.
Hello, thank you for your really fantastic talk. I think this is the most important thing we need to work on in today's school. I would like to hear some more about how can this be implemented in school, in everyday school? How can teachers and how can students work with this?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And it's very much something I want to talk about. I have no final answers to this, by the way. First of all, you will already have noticed that my students my youngest students are 18 and 19 years old. So I have no experience with K-12, right? What I think is, first of all, that if teachers want to begin to bring some of this work into your classroom, that I think you should do this work first. I mean, if you thought, it could be my exercises or it could be something else, but I think the teachers themselves have to get some experience with what it actually is like to turn around and look at yourself and the kinds of discoveries you make, right? Then I think you with other teachers need to begin to look at your own curriculum and figure out how this actually fits. The one place that I'll give you a further example of what I've done. I mean, obviously, the course that I teach is a very specialized course, right? And what I didn't tell you is that it's an elective, and I interview every student before I admit them to the course, because this is an out-of-the-box course. And I don't assume that every student is going to want to do mindfulness meditation, right? And I don't assume that all of your students or even all of you are going to want to do that. But what I have done in other classes, for example, the whole question of how do we deal with the use of devices in the classroom, right? I'm not somebody who wants to simply set a rule, put your devices away, nor do I want to say anything goes. If you want to watch YouTube, that's okay in my classroom. I don't think that that's acceptable. So what I think has to happen is we have to find ways in the classroom to get students to begin to understand what's happening in the classroom when they're on their devices. So I'll give you, here's an experiment that I've already done. But again, this is with older students. It's not with 12-year-olds or 15-year-olds. I told a class of students, 40 students, I said we're going to have 3 different sessions with a different technology policy. One class is going to be no tech, one class is going to be medium tech, and one class is going to be you do whatever you want. If you want to watch YouTube, you can do whatever you want. And at the end of each of those, I created an online survey, and I asked them, what was it like for you? What was your learning like? And what was your experience of other people? And then at the end of these 3 sessions, I got them to vote on which tech policy they thought was most effective. The thing that surprised me, I didn't expect this at all, was that a small majority of people wanted no devices in the classroom. I'm not suggesting that's a generalizable result, but the real secret is, and then in the end, based on what they did, I came up with a tech policy. But the real secret was I wasn't even so interested in the vote as I was interested in them having an actual experience of what it's like to be learning when people are on their devices and not paying attention and when they are. One of the things that I say to my students is attention is not just an individual psychological phenomenon. It is co-constructed by a group of people. And what that means when people are not paying attention, you know what it's like as a teacher. You know that you're a better teacher when people are actually paying attention. Students, for the most part, don't realize that. So I think we have to figure out experiments in the classroom that will get people to actually begin to experience different levels of attention and what that means. I'll give you one other example, which is, this business of recording yourself. I think that has the potential to be an interesting game even for younger students, where you say, okay, you're going to do these 5 things, and I want you to switch between your devices. And then you and a friend are going to look at the video and want you to begin to notice. Maybe you give points when you notice that you switched, and then you're able to tell the class why you switched. Somehow or other, we have to get students at younger ages to be reflective about this. The challenge, though, and this is not my area of expertise, is I don't understand developmentally at what age younger students are capable of observing and being reflective in these ways. And then the last answer I would give you, with apologies because I don't have any final answers, is what I would want to do is I would want to partner with you. I would want to enter into your classroom, and I would want to, over the course of a term, given what I know, I would want to work with you. In other words, I think this has to be a collaborative effort. And that's why I go back to the first thing I said, which is you've got to do this work yourself. And I say the same thing to parents. If parents are going to work with their children in becoming more observant and reflective, then parents need to do the work first. And we know that parents are essentially modeling the very activities that sometimes they're upset with their children for doing, right? So that's the best I have to offer now. It's a very important question, but I only know my own little world. I don't know yours, and I hope that you will be one of the people who will explore this. And if you want to be in further touch about this, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. A great question. We have time for another couple.
Hello. Morten Søby from the Norwegian Center for ICT in Education. I can follow your advice when you talk about mindfulness as a kind of individual approach. Following up the question about schools, I didn't hear any kind of documentation or scientific proof that going from this individual approach and make it into a kind of model for a classroom or a model for a school or a model for an organization. I didn't get that, let's say, documentation. So why do you want to stress mindfulness from an individual way to a more model for organizations? I don't get the point. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate the question. So there's a whole other piece of my work that I haven't talked about, which is not just about the individual. It's about the social and the political. I actually think that a lot of the challenges we face and the choices we need to make are not individual choices. So I didn't say any of that. So, sir, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, a lot of my work under the title of No Time to Think is to look at the economic decisions that we're making and how they're affecting us as institutions and as a society. So I moved onto this work because I think the much harder work is the social and the political. And I myself am not actively doing that work. So I'm not suggesting, I did not mean to suggest that just by doing the individual work that's going to solve the problem in the classroom or the school. It's not. So you're absolutely right. There is a whole dimension of that is the social and the political that I do write about, but I don't have a program, if you like, to get us there. My hope, and it may not be a strong enough hope, but my hope is that the more of us that come to do this work individually, the more that we will have to contribute to the broad societal conversation that we need to have. In fact, the title of my last chapter is A Broader and Deeper Conversation. Wrong direction. which is, this is the placeholder slide for exactly the really important questions that you're asking. So I really thank you so much for bringing those questions into the room. I think we have time for another. All right. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to talking with more of you if I have the chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a present from Selbu. It's from the countryside, and that's what we're wearing when it's cold. And in Seattle, maybe you'll get used to it.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And